Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of the Publisher Lab. Whether you're listening or watching, hopefully we are trying to, we tried for a while to get video back involved in the podcast. Shelby King, obviously joining me here today, but the pandemic kind of wrinkled those plans a bit, and now we're trying it again, huh?
Yeah, I think we initially we started working from home and we're like, oh, we'll just start up the video once we return to the office. And that hasn't happened yet, and it's been over 6 months now, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've all experienced, and I say all, I mean just the collective all, have dealt with the joys of kind of remote video and things like that. And if you've had to do anything on the production side, I feel for you because remote video production is definitely, yeah. I mean, it makes you go crazy to where you use words that aren't even words, apparently. So yeah, I would say that. Yeah, it's been something we've been trying to figure out. So hopefully this will work. And if you're watching, thanks for watching it. And if you're listening, thanks for just doing what you do. What
All
do we have on
right.
the docket today, Shelby?
Yeah, our first topic is an interesting one. It is about the Taboola and Outbrain merger, which is now called off. So this topic, I pulled a little bit from both a Media Post and Ad Exchanger post, but apparently there are two primary reasons why the deal is not moving forward, and this is according to a source that's directly familiar but can't speak publicly due to legal reasons. So Taboola changed its commitments to publishers in June. They stopped offering publisher guarantees and they switched to a rev share model. So this caused a breach in contract for several publisher agreements. And according to the source, this led the company to lose a lot of high-profile customers, including Fox News and News Corp in the UK. So this fallout contributed to Taboola's inability to line up new financing, which had been promised as part of the original merger agreement. So Taboola sought to cut the amount of cash it paid to Outbrain shareholders from 250 million, and they slashed it to 100 million in cash and stock.
Ooh,
So that
that's a
was
nice haircut.
yeah, that was the kind of the second big issue there. So the broken deal between Taboola and Outbrain is positive for publishers that want more choice in content recommendation companies. Um, it is possible that they will return to the bargaining table. At least that's what one of the articles said. Um, they avoided objections to antitrust authorities in the US, but the UK and Israeli regulators hadn't approved the deal yet. So if they do come back, they're still going to have to go through that process. But yeah, I thought that was a big one. We've been kind of following along and the developments there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, people wanted more choices in content and recommendations, and my first thought was, do they? Is that really what the people want? I mean, as far as publishers go, I think one of the things I think about quite a bit is that these these parties, these two in particular that we're discussing, this merger was called off. You know, Other countries, didn't have a problem from an antitrust standpoint. I'm not sure that it violates much antitrust. They the most prominent parties in native advertising? Yes, but I mean I would just challenge the premise that native advertising in of itself is something that is even remotely dominant enough to be considered a field which antitrust could even exist. There are other parties that you can go, and if this is something that you want, I mean, there's plenty of them. They're all equally seedy. And what I mean by that is a lot of them and most of them have made a practice of making publishers sign these like long-term exclusivity agreements. And, in many cases, this requires you to continue to show their advertising on your website or platform or whatever until the end of that contract. And so there's a joke I used to make about like, if you contract a virus, at least it runs its course and you can get rid of it. With some of these native ad providers, you know, you can't ever get rid of it. You know, unfortunately, you're being forced in many of these cases to show those ads, and you know, they're the ones that have got the reputations for the "you'll never believe what she did next." And while for the most part you don't see, you know, the egregious versions of those anymore, they still exist. I still see them from time to time. So yeah, I guess part of me looking at this is more so just kind of like, hey, just so we all remember, like, don't sign long-term agreements with native ad providers. There's no such thing as, you know, one that's like a super dominant one that's going to pay the best rates. Like, I've seen so many comments recently about people complaining about how low the ad rates are from them and things like that. Native advertising is like a lot of different types of advertising. We talked about contextual last week. Like, it's the right tool for the right job. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Um, and yeah, I don't know. Have you seen any native ads recently that you were like, those are really tasteful and I appreciate having those on the page?
None that sparked those exact thoughts though, but I do agree with you about entering into these long-term contracts, because even though you are promised, you know, a revenue guarantee, and you might I don't know, get uh, I don't want to say baited or persuaded, let's say persuaded with, you know, more ad revenue coming in. I mean, they weren't able to fulfill those promises and ended up, you know, breaching those contracts and having to switch their revenue model midway through the contract. So, you know, these long-term contracts that you're signing into, that you're stuck in, sometimes may not even be fulfilled. So that's kind of a big
And
red
think
flag
about
there.
the juxtaposition of the consequences there. So if you're a publisher and one of these native ad providers doesn't uphold their deal, like, you get paid less, right? If you decide you're not going to uphold your end of the contract, they most of the time have like a net 65 or net 90 payout period. So they might just decide they're not going to pay you anymore for up to 2 or 3 months, right? So in which scenario in which, you know, the contract is broken from either side, do you win? So it's a very one-sided contract no matter how you look at it. And trust
Right.
me, you might say like, that'll never happen to me. I mean, the internet is littered with these stories. So
Definitely. The next topic I have on deck today is from Backlinko. So he had an article about, I think it was 17 different ways to find new content ideas. So I just pulled a handful and I figured we could do our old thumbs up, thumbs down, and maybe you could share some additional thoughts if you had any on it. But the first untapped way to find new content ideas is to use the Google image tag. So when you go and you look up um, a word on Google Images, there are those little bubbles underneath the
yeah.
search bar. So for example, if you Googled paleo diet, you're looking at the images. If you looked at the image tags, you could come up with topics like paleo diet meal plan, paleo diet breakfast, and more. And there's like dozens of these little tags. So thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm gonna say thumbs down, just because oftentimes I'll thumbs up all of these because they're generally good. I would just say, like, to me, there's so many other ways to like identify stuff that's in a more data driven manner that I would say this wouldn't be on my top 10.
All right, I think this next one is kind of more of what you're looking for. So this suggestion was using the Reddit keyword research tool, which I actually haven't even heard of before, but
Yeah,
unlike
I'm not sure
most.
that I'm aware of it, to
Oh,
be
really?
honest.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this might be a good one. So, unlike most keyword research tools, the Reddit keyword research tool doesn't take a seed keyword and spit out a bunch of suggestions. Instead, the tool shows you hot topics that people are talking about on Reddit um, within that certain subreddit. So all you need to do is pop in a subreddit into the tool and you'll get a list of keywords that people are talking about on that specific subreddit. And this tool even pulls monthly search volume data from the keyword or the Google Keyword Planner. So yeah, I haven't ever heard of it, but from the sound of it, it looks like it's pretty cool. just because you get to know what people in that, that niche or that community are really kind of digging deeper into.
Yeah, I do think that that can be a good one. I think that it's a nice one if you just heard Shelby explain that. If as soon as you heard it, you were like, oh, wow. And your mind started kind of going around all these different concepts and ideas where you could like tap into stuff that people might be interested in. I think that that's particularly something that people need to look at where they've maybe built a site around something that maybe they're not a full expert in, or maybe something they're not even personally overly interested in. Because I do think that that's something where you want to make sure that you are really fully tapping into your audience. And I think, Reddit, for what it is it's an amazing community filled with people that are very passionate about a lot of different topics. So I'll say thumbs up when applicable.
All right. The next one might be a pretty obvious one, but also may not. Looking at a competitor's YouTube channels. So this one is pretty easy and straightforward. Just go over to a competitor's channel, sort the videos by the most popular all time. You can also look at what's been working best for them over the past, few months to see what's kind of more so trending. Yay or nay, or is this too kind of old school?
Yeah, it's a little bit old school, and also I'm just not a big fan. And this is the marketer in me too, and this is a business philosophy. But I don't really like paying attention to competitors from the standpoint of I think in that respect you're always going to be reactive, and that means you're always going to kind of be behind. Now, I do think that there's an opportunity a lot of times where especially with keywords, you have to think about like what is your quote unquote market share or something like that. But I really like looking at query results and then also like trends. And then I try not to worry too much about the people that I'm competing with. That's why you look at the results. It's like, is this being dominated by, Wikipedia and an old, Stanford.edu study? Like those seem pretty entrenched there. Like I probably won't overtake them in terms of a SERP. You have to look at video kind of the same way. But I do think that, like looking at competitors is something that's ultimately going to, put you behind. Why look at one when you could look at many?
Right. So the last tip we have on hand is to use conferences or talks. So if you want a fresh set of content ideas and don't want to use any sort of tool, check out the conference agenda pages. It'd be for events that are relevant to your topic
Sure.
or niche or industry. But Brian says that these are great because they show you in-demand topics, topics that people are willing to travel and buy a ticket to hear about. So what's your take on this?
So I'm twofold. I'm thumbs up for the most part here, and here's why. I'll go ahead and give it the thumbs up. But yeah, I think you can go a step deeper here, and you're treading on thin territory here. But you could even in many of these conferences, especially now where everything is remote or digital or whatever. In terms of conferences, you can get the presentations that people have given. And in many cases, this is really great content, but no one has ever distilled it down into anything other than a PowerPoint presentation. And you don't want to steal somebody's content, but a lot of times there's a lot of really good info there that you can basically then take, and you already have an outline for, a complete topic. Like how do you completely fundamentally walk through something? And so I'm actually a bigger fan of like taking good presentations and stuff like that and figuring out like, can I make that into video content? Can I make that into written content or audio or whatever, without completely ripping this person off, especially if it doesn't exist anywhere on the web outside of basically that conference presentation. Not so much the conference topics or agendas. Again, I think this is kind of like looking at the images where it's like, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel whenever we haven't even, got, I think for most sites or most publishers or whatever, there's so many other ways for you to look. I mean, to me, you should always have this like giant hopper of like endless content ideas where you're really just trying to figure out which ones are good ones and which ones are bad ones, as opposed to like, man, I just can't ever find any new topics that my audience wants. I think that that's a separate problem.
All right. And I just have one last topic. It's not even really a topic, it's more just kind of an update or something that John Mueller has said. But in one of the webmaster Q&As, he says that keywords in domains aren't really needed. So he advises SEOs and site owners that there's no ranking benefit associated with having keywords in the domain. Apparently, they've been really clear about saying this for the past few years, but it does still contradict with some ranking factor studies and what they say about keywords in the domain. But instead of stressing about the site domain name and whether it will help you rank for a particular word, it says the focus should be on whether it will stand the test of time. So one that can be used long term, regardless of how a business itself changes, is more valuable than one with a keyword in it. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain about picking, your domain, because that's kind of that's a big like decision to make.
Yeah, and most publishers that are, especially independent publishers, have an account someplace filled with like hundreds of domains that they've almost started, or and I think that I love John. I always think of this meme now that just it's a very, very niche meme, but it's a Ned Flanders meme, and he's like, I do all the things John Mueller says, even the things that contradict the other things. And this is one of the ones that makes me laugh because not necessarily that it's a contradiction, but because it's the way that he uses his words. And I think this is what's very frustrating to people about Google is when you hear that, you think, okay, he's telling me it doesn't matter. That's not what he said. He didn't say it doesn't matter. He said that specifically is not a factor. And the reason that is because that's probably true. That said, like, there's something to be said if your website, let's say it's, you mentioned paleo diet earlier. If your website domain is paleodiet.com, you might get some direct traffic that way. Direct traffic does seem to be some type of a ranking signal. So that's one, right? Like you type that into an Apple phone, Apple's just going to take you there, right? The second is the fact that like when you look at search results, the domain name is something that people will look at in terms of like, should I click this? So whether CTR or choice or any of those things are actually things that Google is taking into account and how they account for them, again, up for debate. But at the end of the day, does it really matter if you're getting more traffic because people are clicking on it because they're like, oh, paleodiet.com, I'm looking for paleo recipes. There's 3 sites here. 2 of them, one is shelby.com, one is tyler.com, and one is paleodiet.com. Paleodiet.com seems like maybe it's going to be more in line with the result that I'm looking for. Sans the title tags and meta descriptions, the domain seems to speak for itself. So you are going to get more traffic that way. So to say that it doesn't matter isn't true. To say that it's not a factor is probably true. And I think that's where people get really frustrated with John, is because I think if you were to ask him the question differently, you'd get a different answer.
Yeah, you did a really good job at explaining that too. That is funny. Um,
1 out of 100.
that's all the news that I've got going on this week. Is there anything else that's going on your radar?
No, I mean, you mentioned John Mueller, Gary Illis, and I think we talked about this last week, just the page speed stuff. I've seen he's like kind of doubled down on that a little bit recently, specifically as it relates to the core web vitals. And I would encourage publishers of all breeds, and I mean, anybody with a website, to really pay attention to what they're saying on this, because I've seen so many sites here recently basically cut off their nose to spite their face as it relates to site speed. And it's just where are the bodies? Meaning like, where are these sites that are getting killed because their speed sucks versus, where are these sites that are seeing like endless traffic because they improved their site speed? You just don't see it. And you see examples of, real SEO strategies that are effective out in the ecosystem all the time. Even stuff that like is kind of questionable, you can find some case studies that seem to showcase like disavowing links. While that may not be appropriate for a lot of sites, there are sites where that seems to make a difference, and it's hard to argue with that. And Google does give you that tool, and probably for a reason. Site speed, again, where are the bodies? So I do think you want to listen to them on that stuff. And so that's just like something that was on the top of my mind because I was reading about it this morning and was just seeing like a lot of debate around it. People thinking Google's parsing their words, and I don't think they are on this.
All right. I guess we just have to thank everyone for listening and viewing, hopefully.
Yeah, maybe both. If you want to listen and watch and you're like, I want to know what it looks like when they say those words, come on over and watch it, you know? Everybody's got a little extra free time these days, I guess. But yeah, we do want to thank all of our recent listeners and our new listeners for joining us. And hopefully this information is good and you enjoy it. And if you do, share it with your friends, share it with other publishers, and yeah, leave us a review if you have a chance. Those things are like gold. It's a currency we deal in. That's it. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of the Publisher Lab.